That's me recording, everybody. Okay, it's 5:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. Got a few more people I'm admitting. So welcome to everybody. This is our second focus group today. Looks like we have a couple of repeat offenders that are joining us again. So we're hoping you're going to add something new to the conversation. My name is Erin Greaves, and I'm the communications manager for the city of McCall. And we have some staff members here today to help guide us and answer questions. So we have Michelle Gernevelt, the Community and Economic Development Director, Bessie Jo Wagner, our city clerk, Brian Parker, our city planner, and Meredith Todd, our assistant planner. And we might have some other members popping on throughout the conversation. So we're going to start tonight with a presentation, and then we'll move into a question phase. For the question and answer, we'll just go ahead and utilize the at the bottom of your screen under reactions, raise your hand, or you can enter your questions in the chat window that I will make sure to administer throughout the meeting. And if you have any questions, you can always just direct message me, and I'm happy to answer any of those throughout. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Michelle with her presentation.
Great, thanks, Erin. And good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us here. We're going to try to keep this as efficient as possible. So just so we know who's attending, if you could put your name and your affiliation in the chat, that would be great for us, just to see who's here, and that way everybody can kind of see who's here. So basically, we're going to be talking about managing short-term rentals within McCall. So first off, just the definition of a short-term rental. Basically, this is a residence that could be single family, it can be multifamily, and it's rented for the purpose of an overnight lodging for compensation for at least 1 day, and it can be no more than 30 days. So just to give you a sense of what's happening in McCall with short-term rentals, basically right now we have about 500 short-term rentals within the city limits. So there's often a conversation that happens in community that links short-term rentals to the housing situation. But really the focus of this evening is not that. It really is to focus on issues related to health and safety and impacts to neighborhoods and neighbors. So of course we know that there are impacts on our housing situation, and we're working on that separately. We know they're related, but we want to sort of be really clear that that's really not our focus this evening. So basically we've seen a lot of short-term rentals increase in the last, especially 5 years. And while often the conversation, I think, in communities around short-term rentals is one that is proposed as a negative thing, that short-term rentals are negative to the community, I think here in McCall, we perceive that there are positive and negative consequences to short-term rentals. And we see a lot of those positive benefits, whereas, you know, a high percentage of our homes, 72% of our homes, are second homes. So in the past, even when we were at 60% second homeowners, we saw a lot of our neighborhoods go dark, and so basically they became ghost towns. And so there are economic benefits of having short-term rentals within our neighborhoods, and we see that as we see more people, we see more visitors come into our community, supporting our businesses. The other piece is it also allows us to, we do generate local option tax off of hotels, motels, and short-term rentals. And then those funds are basically put into a pool that are used to offset secondary impacts or impacts from visitation. So those can be used for a number of different community efforts, including housing. So we also know that we have residents that use short-term rentals as a way to sort of pay their mortgage. And so a lot of times we'll see, you know, locals use them, their accessory dwelling units for some income generation or that sort of thing. So again, that's why I put in this next slide, is that really our community isn't anti-short-term rental. We're not trying to prohibit short-term rentals. What we're trying to do is manage short-term rentals so that we're addressing health and safety issues, and that we're minimizing impact to neighborhoods and neighbors. We're really trying to maintain kind of that neighborhood atmosphere, and less of that idea that, you know, you're living next to the party house when you have to go to work the next day, and you didn't get any sleep, right? So that's really the goal of all of this. So within permitting short-term rentals, today we're really going to be talking about the permitting and the land use regulations. I mentioned that we collect the local option tax on short-term rentals, and then there's obviously a code enforcement piece. So we're going to focus just mostly on the permitting and land use. So just to give you a little bit of history about short-term rentals within McCall, for the longest time, our code was silent to them, and we knew they existed, but there actually weren't tons of them at that point. And then what we started to realize was that we're having a lot of complaints and issues, especially related to these very large short-term rentals. So rather than trying to regulate all of them, we started off as sort of this light touch of, let's just regulate the ones that sleep 20 or more people. And so at that time, we only had 6 of those. So we required all the existing and new large short-term rentals to come through a conditional use permit process. And that allowed us to add additional conditions to make sure they were compatible, and for the new ones to evaluate if they were appropriate in those locations. So again, the point of that was really to mitigate secondary impacts. It wasn't necessarily to prohibit them. We were challenged in court over one of our conditional use permits that we issued, and it was upheld. So we basically got the confirmation that we were using our codes appropriately to manage short-term rentals as it relates to state code and our local codes. So then what happened was we started getting many more short-term rentals, and we started getting more and more complaints about other short-term rentals that might be 20 persons or less. And so at that point, we worked with our council and our planning and zoning commission, and we came up with just general standards for all short-term rentals. And just to review those for those that might not be familiar, that included a criteria related to parking, to occupancy, to noise, to safety. Let's see, posting of all the requirements, providing contact information of either the homeowner or the property owner, if and that was to all the neighbors within 300 feet, so they had somebody to call. Specifying that no events were allowed at short-term rentals, and that if there was 2 units on a property, that one of them had to be owner occupied or a local housing unit, so we could make sure that they weren't kind of turning into, again, kind of these investment party properties. There was camping regulations put in place, obviously trash service requirements, and then all of the short-term rentals are basically required to come through our business permit process. So that happened in January of 2020. And so we've had a couple of years to look at, you know, those regulations and the impacts and evaluate and see kind of how things are going. So since then, we've had a couple of work sessions. Our council was very interested in short-term rentals because they often hear about them. And so we had a couple of work sessions to evaluate existing regulations, our existing permit process. And we talked with them to kind of get a sense of where they wanted to go with all of this. At the same time, we also worked really closely with McCall Fire District, and our chief is on this call if there's any questions, but it really is a partnership between the city of McCall and McCall Fire District to ensure that these short-term rentals are safe for our visitors as well as our community. So one of the kind of the first steps was we looked at 11 peer cities and rural counties. And so you can see here all the communities that we looked at. We looked at a number of communities within Idaho, like Driggs, Ketchum, Sandpoint. We looked at a lot of Californian communities. We looked at Park City, Utah. We looked at Jackson and Bend, just to understand kind of how these other kind of high amenity mountain town communities are regulating and managing and permitting their short-term rentals. So we looked at kind of 8 different areas. And first off, we wanted to understand kind of what was their approval process. So what types of permits and licenses are required in their communities. We wanted to understand if the licenses could be transferred if there was new ownership. And what I will just kind of give you, I'll give you some of the findings of our research. I won't give you all of it because it's kind of extensive, but we're happy to provide that if anybody's interested. What we did find was that 7 of these communities require some kind of short-term rental permit. We found that basically all of the communities except one required new permits when there was a change of ownership. We also looked at an inspection process. So we wanted to understand which communities were requiring physical inspections and then who actually performed those inspections. And so we found 7 of these communities actually required some sort of inspection process. We also looked at limitations. So if there was any sort of limitations related to, where short-term rentals could be located and what type of short-term rentals are allowed. We also looked at caps. So some communities actually put some kind of cap for the total number of short-term rentals within the community. This is obviously very common in California, not so much in Idaho. We found that Sandpoint was the only community that is actually doing this. And then number 6 was really looking at how many people are allowed within these short-term rentals, so the occupancy. And as many of you know, that we currently allow 4 people per bedroom. And what we found was that all of these communities were essentially allowing 2 persons per bedroom. And with a few exceptions for children and a few other things. And then we were looking at different standards. So these are the health safety issues. We're looking at noise, how they manage noise, parking, access, trash. A lot of the communities in California had kind of limitations about changing the exterior so that it feels residential and less of a commercial use within neighborhoods. Obviously posting notices, animal control, camping, and events. So, and then lastly, we looked at enforcement. So basically how are these different communities dealing with enforcement issues? And this was where we saw kind of the most differences among the community in terms of how they were enforcing them. So just jumping ahead to what we're thinking about, the purpose of this focus group is to kind of get feedback on these suggested changes to both our permitting process as well as the land use process. And so what we're looking at is a change from using our standard business license process to an actual specific short-term rental permit. Our clerk's department, who's also, Bessie Jo's on the phone this evening, they manage all of the business licenses for the city of McCall. So this applies to every single business, and short-term rentals have kind of been thrown into that process. So again, the idea is to change it and make it specific for short-term rentals. So different application process, or I would say application itself, and potentially a different fee as well. So the other thing is that we currently allow property managers to get a license, and the idea would be that there would need to be a permit for each unit that is a short-term rental. So if you had several short-term rentals, you'd have to get a permit for each one. They couldn't be umbrellaed under kind of a property management company. The idea is that these permits would need to be renewed annually, which we found is kind of a best practice from a lot of the other communities. One of the things that we're looking at is adding an inspection process. So at the front end of the process, we work with the McCall Fire District, and they would come out to your short-term rental, and there'd be a checklist of kind of health safety requirements, things like fire extinguishers, smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, that type of thing. And then you would need to pass your inspection in order to get the permit. And then lastly, we would just need to revise our fee schedule to ensure that this new process would cover staff's time for administering the short-term permit. So in terms of changes to the land use code, basically this is just adding a definition of events into the short-term rental section that we have within our city code, so that's pretty basic. The other thing is just making sure that there's appropriate access and that it's maintained to be safe. So that's, making sure that we don't have obstacles blocking access, that we're not creating issues with our right-of-way or issues with neighbors. The other proposed change is to reduce the occupancy to 2 persons per bedroom. And obviously add some health safety requirements as it relates to the inspection. And then lastly, just to make sure that we're not seeing significant exterior changes that would eliminate appearance of residential character of the short-term rentals. So those are the land use codes that are suggested at this point. And also to give you a sense of the timeline, we're looking at, once we get kind of feedback from these focus groups, we're looking at drafting code. It would move to the McCall Area Planning and Zoning Commission. They would make a recommendation to City Council, and the county commissioners will need to work with the county because we administer the land use codes for the McCall impact area, but we don't necessarily manage some of the other processes in the impact area. So that will be kind of an ongoing conversation with them. There would be a public hearing at each of these meetings. So you would have an opportunity to weigh in either a written comment, you could attend the meetings, or also attend virtually. So when we first had the work sessions with council, we were talking about a target date of January 1st of 2023. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to make that timeline, but that at least was the target date that was established. It will take a while to figure out what is the process, especially if an inspection process is added, and we need to kind of certify that all of the short-term rentals are safe and pass that inspection process. So that probably wouldn't all happen before January 1st. So we would build in some process for that. And then once we have developed more specific language, we would go ahead and put that on our city's website, and Erin will talk more about how we can communicate information to all of you on any proposed changes. But so basically that's an overview of what we're thinking at this point. And with that, I will turn it back over to Erin. Again, the idea is to answer any questions you may have, hear your concerns, or if you have any additional ideas on things you think we're missing in this list, feel free to provide those to us as well. Thanks.
Perfect, thank you. So I just put just a reminder down in the chat window, the 2 different ways that you can interact tonight in this meeting is to raise your hand using reactions down at the bottom of your screen, or you can put your question or comment in the chat window. Just a reminder, this is being recorded, and so everything will be documented, including the chat window, and it'll be posted up on our city's YouTube channel and the website once that's created and we have data for you. So we'll go ahead and open the floor. If anybody has any questions or comments, we're happy to take them. Looks like we have our first hand, and Mr. Bodie, you're on.
All right, can you hear me?
Ken, yes, you're good.
Hey, how's it going? So I've been a short-term rental owner in McCall for 2 years now. I completely agree, that we probably should have a defined permit process, especially considering that now that most of the vacation rental websites are actually paying our taxes for us. So in theory, we have no reason to even have a business license any longer unless there's a permit process. So I would say I'm in agreement with that. But the not having over 2 people per room, I guess I'd like to understand, the current policy, which is, I think, is it 10 people per house or is it 12 people per house that then you have to have a special exception permit?
So yeah, I can answer that. Currently, our current regulations are 4 person per bedroom. And then once you exceed 20 persons or more, you need a conditional use permit.
I don't think it's 20 people. I think it's 12 or 14, isn't it?
No.
Okay. Well, needless to say, I guess, are there some specific examples of scenarios that has led you to go to 2 people per room versus the current policy, outside of the fact that 8 California cities currently do that? I guess help me understand like what specific instances in McCall has led to this policy.
Yeah, I think ultimately what we were looking at was really trying to bring down the number of people and hence the impact of traffic, parking, noise, to kind of something that's more residential in character for neighborhoods. And so, 4 persons per bedroom, you can kind of fit a lot of people into sort of regular or smaller sized homes. And so when we kind of did our research, we looked at these other communities. It looked like the standard practice for pretty much every community we looked at, and I think we'll look at more, was 2 persons. We heard some great comments at the previous session at 1 o'clock because there was some concern about occupancy and people talking about potential ideas for exempting children, or that there could potentially be exemptions based on the size of the room or the size of the structure, or and so we took some notes kind of based on the feedback that we heard at the previous session. And again, like, we did the research and we were kind of looking at, what we're trying to avoid, to be honest, is like, and our fire chief is on the call and I'll have him speak to this, but we have seen, situations where people are cramming a lot of bunk beds and a lot of people in spaces that aren't necessarily safe for them to get out of. And we're really trying to avoid that scenario. And so Garrett, I don't know if you want to add any information related to that and your experience with going into some of these homes.
Hey, Michelle, I'll just leave you with one final comment before he does. So as a homeowner, both from an insurance liability perspective and just from my property, like longevity of maintenance and whatnot, I have a personal vested interest in ensuring that not more than the occupancy that I set up for my home, which is 12, is kept. And as homeowners, we can do that through our wireless routers. We can do that through Ring cameras when you enter the home. So us as homeowners have that responsibility for our own sakes to ensure that there's not, 30 people in a house. I just don't know that we need the city of McCall telling us how many people we can have in each room, capped at 2. I mean, that would hinder so many people's ability to make money on their vacation rentals. And again, I'm not someone, I use my cabin a lot, but I have to offset the cost of it by renting it out to a certain extent because it's so expensive. So I would just leave you with that. I don't know that we need the city of McCall dictating how many people we can have in each room outside of, the 4. So.
Thank you, Mr. Bodie. I would also just go ahead and I don't know if Garrett's going to log in or not. Oh, there he is. But he does make a good point that Valley County is 12 people. So Michelle and Garrett, maybe you guys can talk a little bit to the group about the difference between the impact area and the city of McCall, since that was brought up.
Oh, sure. So basically what we're talking about is the city limits, and then McCall impact area is the area right outside of the city limits. And so we do all the administration from building and planning and zoning for Valley County. So we have a joint planning and zoning commission. And so we administer, basically the city and the county have the same codes for the area right outside the city limits. So it feels like it's all the city, but it's technically county, but we just do the administration. So hopefully that clarifies. And then outside of that, in the unincorporated Valley County, it sounds like that was potentially the comment about the 12 persons.
So Garrett, did you have anything you wanted to add, or should I move on to the next question?
I don't think I do, unless there's a specific question.
Okay, we'll wait for it. Diane, are you available?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can, go for it.
Well, first, thank you very much for holding these meetings and giving us an opportunity to give you input. My husband and I do live in the McCall area of impact, and we unfortunately have a lot of experience in what goes wrong with a neighborhood short-term rental. We had a property next to us that was extremely difficult to live with for 3 years. It was billed as a 4-bedroom short-term rental, but one of those bedrooms was actually a loft without any kind of secondary egress or a closet. And we never saw any groups less than 12, and we often saw groups more than 30 in this 3 or allegedly 4-bedroom home. So a couple comments and question. It seems to me that there should be a definition of what a bedroom is, because we do hear anecdotal evidence of people, as you just were referring, people are putting bunk beds in unusual places. People are converting parts of garages to sleeping areas. In this case, this was a loft above a kitchen without any kind of, as I said, secondary egress. So it seems to me that there should be a definition of what a bedroom is. And secondly, and maybe this will be in your inspection process, but it certainly seems that there should be required secondary ingress and egress to any bedroom. We were extremely concerned because this property operated essentially as a mothership. I don't know how many people actually spent the night there, but there were many, many people coming in and out during the day, and big boatloads full of people coming up. So we were very concerned that this could have been an absolute disaster with a loss of life, because there were people spending a lot of time and all night in an area that did not have the ability to evacuate people if there was, for example, a fire in the kitchen, which was right below the loft. So if you could respond and take my comments on requesting a definition of what a bedroom is, and also ensuring that there is proper secondary access to any sleeping area. And thank you very much.
Okay, Diane, I'll try to answer that sort of quickly. So we will have sort of a definition of bedroom, and then part of the inspection process is to make sure that there's safe ingress and egress out of bedrooms with some certain standards. And that's one of the issues that we're trying to address with the inspection process.
Okay, I appreciate very much that those will be covered. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to Thomas now. Are you available, Mr. Hawksworth?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can. You're good.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. We have a short-term rental in McCall for probably the past 4 years. I know there's a shortage in housing. So the past year we've had a long-term renter in there, but they're leaving, and we're converting it back to a short-term rental. We take our occupancy very seriously. We require that our guests let us know how many people they have before they arrive. We can fine them with our short-term rental agreement if they're more than they advertise to us that they're having the property. One of the things we have a 3-bedroom unit, and one of the bedrooms has 2 bunk beds, or 1 bunk bed. It's got 2 doubles, and we find that a lot of our guests are families, 2 families, and they bring kids, and the bedroom will be advertised as 4 people in that bedroom, and we find that that's very popular, and it sounds like the number of people in the room is going to be a topic of discussion here already, but I just wanted to see if the city had any input as far as that goes with kids being considered in the number of people per bedroom.
Sure. So I think there's a number of ways that you can do it. I think the most common way to manage it is the number of persons per bedroom. But as I mentioned, I think there's other communities who have looked at exceptions for children under a certain age. The other option is to sort of create number per bedroom or a max occupancy. So it could be 12 people is the max, but so it becomes less important about how many people are in per bedroom, but it's about a total max occupancy. So I think we can look at a number of different things. It seems like occupancy seems to be kind of this the one subject that everybody has concerns about. So I think that's something that we could look into a little further to kind of understand sort of what makes the most sense for our community.
I appreciate it. Thank you. That's all I had.
Perfect. Thank you. Michael Chu, you're next.
Well, good evening. Can you all hear me?
We can, sir. You're good.
Okay, thank you. So I was on the original meeting and drove all the way up from McCall from the Valley for the in-person meeting, but wasn't informed that the in-person meeting was canceled.
What in-person meeting?
Yeah, well, there was
We
supposed
didn't
to be
have
one
one.
tonight at 5:30. So, I mean, irregardless, I mean, it's important to me as a property owner, as well as a property manager, to be able to at least express some of my concerns and provide some feedback. So I appreciate this talking point or this meeting for this. I've been a property manager for over 30 years. We have a townhome in the downtown section, and as a property manager, I can't manage from the Valley, so we hired Done Right. So I appreciate everything that Kelly Hill's done, but just to speak to some of these things, I'm a little dubious as to the real reasoning behind some of these ordinances, and I'm very concerned as a property owner because I go over and above and beyond everything that has to do to be able to, assist the neighborhood integrity of my development. I'm also on the board for our HOA. So I really want to make sure that I don't get a bad name with my neighbors. But really, I mean, we focus on safety and security for our units. I mean, I have a Ring doorbell. I check who's coming in. I have fire extinguishers, not just one, but one on every level on the wall where it's not pretty, but I also have them inspected regularly. I added additional CO detectors, even though the ones, because this is brand new development, even though the coded ones are there, are both smoke and CO. I have a propane sniffer. I installed a fire escape ladder on the 3rd floor. I mean, I have a noise aware software, which really Kelly should speak to more. But I added an additional level to make sure that my neighbors aren't negatively impacted. I baselined that. I've actually gone below the recommended values for disturbing after 10 p.m. I mean, on and on. The big issue that I really have concern with for the group, and really the council I would like to address, is this issue with occupancy. And I think that we as property managers, especially Kelly and some of the other people that manage a majority of these units in McCall, have actual metrics and data that I'm curious that the city's delved into. Because really, I went into my system for my property alone, and I can tell you right now, last year alone, based on all the metrics I've got, is we were total days occupied 178 days out of the year. Of those, 30 days were my family, 148 days were for guests, and so that's only an occupancy of 49% of the year. And of that metric, really, I looked at the occupancy levels. Right now at 4, we have bed space for a total of 9 people. We never went to 9 people in the entire last year. And of 8 people, we went 4 times or 12 days. So really, I'm wondering, where is this concern of occupancy really coming from? I understand that, what is it? I can't remember the poor gal that was just talking that had a problem unit. What I would like to, and I think we all agree with a majority of what's being proposed, permittings, inspections, the fees, as long as they're not, to the point where it dissuades people from having a short-term rental, but it makes it better for the community. So if we have an occupancy limit, I'd like to know what the metric is for that, because it's not a one size fits all, because not every house is identical and not every property is identical. So really, I think that we should come to, as was proposed earlier in the meeting before, some sort of maybe HUD-based metric that really is reasonable, like a 2+1. So in other words, maybe 3 per or 4, but I mean, to just say there is a problem without providing a detailed explanation of what that problem is concerns me. So really, I think if council and the city really utilize the data that we have as property managers, and we have a lot of it, we could provide you with a lot of answers to whether there is a problem or not a problem. So that's really where my concern is. I want to be able to enjoy our place up there. I want to be able to share it. We utilize that with families. We go on family vacations up there with another couple, and this will speak to the occupancy again. we have another couple we vacation with that have 2 kids. We have 2 kids. So we have 2 king size beds in 2 of our bedrooms. And then we have a full over full bunk bed with a pull out underneath. So that's where we have bed space for 9 people. But, you know, we have 8 and, you know, that allows the kids to hang out together and have fun. But we also make sure that, again, it's safe. There's ingress, egress points, there's fire extinguishers, smoke detectors, all that to speak to that issue. So really, there's that. And then the final concern I have, and I appreciate you guys allowing me to have this moment, is the fact that, you know, I didn't get notification of these meetings, special meetings or not. I went on the website when I first got wind of this on Friday, went to go pull up an agenda. There was no agenda for this meeting. So, you know, to say that, you know, I mean, I'm dubious as the fact that there's secret meetings that really that the minds have been made up before the input of the owners and property managers has been able to be held. So that's my concern, and I appreciate you allowing me to express my feelings this evening. And I look forward to working with you and with Kelly and with our, you know, other property management professionals and owners as well to come up with a reasonable ordinance that makes sense for everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chu. Yeah, a couple of quick points. I know you had a lot in there, and I know Michelle takes great notes. I'm sure she'll address those. So these meetings are focus groups that were meant and intended to be invitations so that we could actually hear from everyone, because if we get hundreds and hundreds of people in a meeting, it's difficult to manage. Certainly not secret meetings, but also not considered a public meeting necessarily. These are here for you so that we can hear from you, homeowners and property managers, on what your thoughts are, not after, but before the ordinances are written. So that's number one. Number two, that's why you didn't see it on the website. We did send this out to anyone who had a business license with the city of McCall, with the intention that if we felt like more meetings were necessary to extend our reach to get more feedback, we would do that. And so now moving forward, now you have this information. I also know we did have a tentative meeting scheduled at one point in person, and that meeting was never advertised because we could not get the room. And that's why we didn't have that in-person meeting, and that's why it wasn't shared with the public, because there wasn't one. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Michelle to comment on any of the questions that you had, Mr. Chu. And we're so sorry for your inconvenience today.
I don't have anything really to, I don't know if, I think there were more statements than questions. If there's something specific, I'm happy to answer it. But I did hear all of your points, so thank you.
And obviously I did too. So we took it. Yeah, and there are also a lot of great comments in the chat. We're seeing the same sort of information regarding occupancy. But one question, Michelle, that did come up that I think we should probably clarify, which is just curious, why are you focusing your research on California? We live and have managed second homes in Colorado, and there seem to be so many more regulations in California than anywhere else. So maybe just mention how you got your peer group.
Sure, we often have kind of a list of peer communities that we go to. So this was kind of from that list. We will plan on doing more research so that we obviously looked at kind of our like communities within Idaho, but then we'll look beyond. I mean, I know there's a lot of literature and a lot of short-term rental management going on in all the states around us. So every community, you know, takes a slightly different approach. So we were trying to do a sampling. We weren't trying to be heavy on from any one state or area, but kind of areas that we know are working on this, and we could easily kind of get that information. But I think we're going to dig in a little bit more on that research to make sure that we have some more information from and more representation from other places.
Thanks, Michelle. I do want to get to this other question in the chat, but Julie, you've been waiting patiently. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Hi, thanks again for holding this meeting. I just wanted to elaborate. I personally reached out to my homeowners who I manage their vacation rentals and notified them of what's been happening here with what you guys are trying to propose with your new revisions to compliance. And I did get a letter I'd like to share with you. I will keep it as brief as possible. It's not that long, but I think it really hits on a lot of these points. with emphasis from another owner. And I want to thank personally every owner that showed up today, because you guys have a voice. You have your own insurance policies that protect your investment, and us as managers are doing what you ask us to do and manage it. And so I just want to thank you guys first and foremost for representing many of the owners who are not informed of what's going on. My husband and I would like to share our opinion on these new rules that are being talked about for short-term rentals in McCall. We live in California, bought a second house in McCall with the intention of moving there when we retire. We love the small town community and people. We live in a small rural town now and have acreage and enjoy having our space, but California's laws and regulations are ruining our way of life. There are so many things that drew us to McCall, such as lakes, ski resorts, etc. We also experience kindness from everyone we've ever spoken with on the phone, everyone in the community. We love the beautiful open spaces. We recently heard about the rules and regulations that the city is trying to impose on short-term rentals and would like to voice our thoughts. We are very concerned with these regulations that the city is trying to pass. More regulations mean more tax dollars are needed to fund the entity that will be overseeing the regulations. Coming from California, we are very familiar with being taxed to death for things that aren't really necessary. Instead of making a rule on how many people can stay in a room, why not trust that the owners know how many people can safely fit in a room? Why not educate owners on the safety issues you're concerned about before involving another government entity? We need to get back to common sense, education, and trusting people to do the right thing and less government regulation. People will cooperate when they understand and care about something, not because they're forced to. To only allow 2 people per room is completely unreasonable. Some rooms are big enough for an entire family, some are only big enough for 2. But I think the homeowner should be able to determine that, since they know the property. Sometimes kids need to be in a room with their parents. They have to stay in a separate room from their parents because of this new ordinance. That's unrealistic. I understand that there are always those few who ruin it for the majority, but please reconsider too many regulations. Please don't turn McCall into another California. We're only renting our house out. You have to pay our utility bills, HOA fees, and upkeep, not necessarily for extra income. We have a manager to take care of it and make sure all things go smoothly, and to check out the renters before we allow them to stay. We value our property and house and make sure it looks nice, is well maintained, and is not an eyesore or problem for anyone. We can't rent it out long-term because then we'd never get to use it ourselves, which would defeat the purpose of buying it. Please consider educating the owners and seeing how that changes things before creating more government oversight.
Thanks for reading that, Julie. Did you have any additional comments?
No, but basically, from my perspective, we do follow, I follow every ordinance that I am required to do by the city. And so why you need to bring in somebody to come in and enforce more ordinance when we have our fire extinguishers, our smoke detectors, our CO2, we notify, I maintain and manage occupancy, because this might sound very minor and minute, but I don't allow a distribution of linens until I know the exact number of people. And that's how I regulate, knowing exactly how many people are coming. If they sign up on Airbnb and say there's only 2 people coming in a property that sleeps 8 people, and I said, well, then you're only getting linens for 2 people. And then all of a sudden it changes. And like, oh, sorry, we have 4 kids and da-da-da-da. We're trying to do really creative, constructive ways to get to the bottom of how we can also be on top of that. The Ring cameras help. Everyone's really doing the best they can to help follow the ordinances that are already in place.
Thanks, Julie. That was great sharing. I want to turn it over just for a minute to Garrett from our police, or from our fire department rather, somebody asked the question, what exactly are we talking about here? What are the safety concerns? And so if Garrett, if you wouldn't mind just kind of listing what you see are the major concerns for you in helping and keeping people safe in the community with short-term rentals.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. Thank you all for being here. We're working through this short-term rental idea simultaneously with you guys, and it's great to hear all your feedback. I think the main concerns from my perspective in looking at vacation rental properties, obviously is smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, propane detectors, and specifically fireplaces, wood stoves, gas inserts, and wood burning fireplaces, and making sure that they're installed appropriately and have been inspected appropriately. Also looking at egress through and from bedrooms. I think a lot of you guys that have vacation rental properties, and I know you toe the line, I've been in plenty that people try to stuff people into places they shouldn't be stuffing them and without egress that they should have. So those are kind of our main concerns.
Thank you. Let's move on to Rachel. Rachel, thanks for being so patient. What did you want to share with the group?
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to talk. I just wanted to voice the similar concern about the occupancy. I own a second home in McCall. We rent it out as a short-term rental. I want to echo what some of the other gentlemen before me have already said, that if you limit the occupancy, I can no longer keep the bunk room that I use for my own children when we go there to use this house. So it would limit my own family's ability to utilize my house. So I would propose considering something like sleep areas versus bedrooms, and consider things like proper egress, proper smoke detectors with those sleep areas. That would give the folks who do have a loft the ability to use a loft. I own short-term rentals in 2 other communities, one in Washington State on the coast, one in Oregon on the coast, and both of those communities have greater sleeping limits than what you're proposing. So I think consideration of expanding to other communities other than California would be reasonable, and not something that infringes on my ability to use it, because conceptually, I don't know how I would do that. Would you propose that I take out a bunk bed and then my own family can't use the property how we want to use it? Whereas you would never do that to a private homeowner, to say you couldn't have 2 bunk beds in a perfectly large size bedroom with appropriate egress and smoke detectors and all of that. The second thing I wanted to ask had to do with the ability to deny the permit process. I agree with the permit process. I'm happy to comply with that. I've complied with all of the rules that you've set forth for the last 4 years that I've owned a home in McCall. But I wonder, for those of us that currently have homes and we go through this process and we pass the inspection, if you do choose to limit the number of properties that you're giving this permit process to, would there be some priority or grandfather process for those of us that already have short-term rental, as it is now, business licenses?
I can try to answer that. As we mentioned, we haven't fully developed like any ordinances, so we haven't worked through all of the details. These are just concepts to sort of vet with this group as well as others. So basically, I mean, the idea is that it's an annual permit process, so you would need to pass your inspection. Once you did so, you'd be issued a permit. So, I mean, I think, you know, when we look at the code enforcement section, I think that's an area, if we have repeat offenders, you know, communities have the ability to revoke licenses when people are clearly violating. It sounds like most of you are all about compliance, and we so appreciate that. Unfortunately, probably the people who aren't interested in compliance aren't on this call. And so ultimately, you know, we would have to work through that. But I think in terms of occupancy, we'll definitely be exploring that more to try to understand. I think a lot of the comments that I've heard so far are especially related to families. And I think homes that are providing a short-term rental for families and family reunions, or couples that, or families that get together. And I think there's potentially the exemption opportunity for children and things like that. I mean, I think ideally what we're trying to avoid too, as it relates to impacts on neighbors, because while you guys, you know, all get to be short-term rental, either property owners or homeowners, we get a ton of complaints from neighbors, right? The impacts of these short-term rentals on neighborhoods. And so I think, you know, the whole limitation in terms of occupancy, that kind of ties into noise, into traffic, parking, some of these other issues that we're trying to address. And again, we're not trying to over-regulate short-term rentals. We've always taken a pretty light approach. But as we get more and more into our community, you know, what we're finding is that we're having some issues. And so what we're trying to do is like put forth some reasonable kind of management of them. We're not trying, I don't think we're looking at capping them or prohibiting them or doing any of those kinds of things. We're really just trying to sort of manage those secondary impacts for specifically health and safety, and specifically like neighborhood impact. I mean, that's really what we're trying to get at with some of these proposed ideas.
So those of us who are currently operating, if we meet the new criteria, it sounds like we would be able to still get a permit to operate from what you're saying.
Yeah, as long as you meet, it's gonna be
Right,
like
as
a
long as we meet
checkbox.
the criteria. Okay.
Yeah, it's not, it's, so what we're talking about, the permitting is really an application process with an inspection.
Okay.
It's not necessarily you're coming through some sort of entitlement process where there's criteria that could be granted or not granted. It's sort of you check the box, you get your permit.
And if there are complaints against us, I've never been notified of any complaint at my property. Are you currently notifying homeowners if there are complaints at their properties?
So our current process actually requires that the short-term rental notify all the neighbors within 300 feet of the contact person. So that's either the homeowner or the property owner. So I think most of the complaints are actually going to those parties. We still do get quite a few complaints that go to our McCall PD. And so they respond to that. That's all part of the public record. And we're not necessarily going back because we don't have the staff to go back and notify everybody. But generally speaking, there's, like I'm saying, there's a number of them that we get tons of complaints on. And then there's a lot of them that we never hear anything about. You know, if we have over 500 of them in our community, we're not getting complaints on 500 of them, right? So again, we're trying to come up with some sort of like reasonable balance that we can balance all of these different interests and come up with kind of a process that works for everybody the best that we can. We know we're not going to make everybody happy, right? So that's our job, is to find sort of like some sort of reasonable balance in all of this.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So yeah, we have a couple of things coming up in the chat. Some of them are a bit, we've heard them before, or you've just answered them, like enforcement and compliance. One question I saw on here is, how do you actually validate complaints between, actual complaints and people who just are against short-term rentals? I mean, our police force are professionals, and they know what they're dealing with when they go out into the community. They also know our community's locations that are repeat offenders. And so those are all things that are taken into account. If that's something you'd like to explore further, I encourage you to email me and I'll connect you with our police chief and you guys can explore that together. Let's go ahead and go to Marta Frost. Did you have a question or comment?
I have a concern about the occupancy. I have a 4,500 square foot home with 4 bedrooms. My concern is that I would be limited to having only 8 people in 4,500 square foot home with huge bedrooms. And then 1,800 square foot home with 4 bedrooms would also be limited to 8 people. I don't see how that would be a reasonable regulation. Is there any comment from the city of McCall on that, as far as square footage of the bedrooms go?
Yeah, I think I mentioned that I think the most common way to sort of manage occupancy is persons per bedrooms, but that's not to say that there aren't other models. And so, looking at square footage or looking at, basically setting up kind of that standard and some sort of exemption, like if you're over a certain size or you check all the other health safety issues, you can be exempted for additional people, through the inspection process. We don't want to make it too complicated because I think like that becomes a nightmare to administer. And but generally speaking, I think there's a bunch of different ways of looking at that. And we were kind of throwing this out as kind of a standard practice.
Right. I just hope that that's not going to be a standard practice within the city of McCall to look at 1,800 square foot home the same as 4,000 square foot home. And another question I have is, how is the city going to, if there is occupancy limit, how is the city going to check that the owners are complying with it, or the property management companies are complying with it?
So basically, I think through the application process, you would be required to provide the information. Part of the reason we chose bedrooms is it's easy to find that information from the county assessors. So we're not getting makeshift rooms that don't have ingress or egress or aren't proper sleeping quarters. So that's sort of how we came up with that, with sort of an ease of information and administration.
Okay, so will that, is the city going to regulate websites of property management companies that are advertising the homes, or will
No.
there be inspector going into a home and checking how many people are staying there, or anything like that at all?
No, basically, I mean, so basically you provide the information in your application process,
Mhm.
right? Which includes information about your property. The inspection process verifies and makes sure you meet all the standards. Then you're issued a permit. However, you run your property until there is a complaint or some sort of apparent violation. We don't know until the code enforcement phase. So unless a neighbor or somebody calls and complains, calls the police department or something, until we're notified, we're not proactively checking in on your guests or anything like that.
Right. And another thing is occupancy. Well, actually, two more things. Occupancy meaning people spending the night, or people being at the property at any point in time.
So what we were thinking about is its occupancy just in general of the home itself.
So meaning if my home, 4,500 square foot home, only, let's, hypothetically, only 8 people are allowed. If there are more at any point in time, I'm in violation. Is that correct?
We haven't worked out those details yet in
Okay.
terms of if there's some sort of exception to have like friends over for dinner or something like that. Again, we're trying to create some pretty basic rules so that, again, we're addressing health and safety and neighborhood impact. Short-term rentals should be residential in character, right? So
Right.
they shouldn't be mini hotels in our neighborhood. So when we see 30 plus people or 40 plus people staying in these homes, they're not residential in character. So that's really what we're trying to address. And that's what our council has asked us to address by creating additional permitting / regulations. It's not necessarily to nitpick every little sort of thing that seems to be working just fine, right?
Well, right. And I totally understand. Neighbors will do that though. If you give them 2 people per bedroom, if you give them fuel, they will be sitting there with binoculars and cameras, and it's going to be ugly. I've seen that happen before, unfortunately. Although I have wonderful neighbors in my subdivision. I have no complaints. I have never had any complaints about my home. I'm a property manager, and I speak from experience about, in general, how people are, and how neighbors can complain and have frivolous complaints that we receive as property management companies. Then we go to a property and we see no problem. There's a grandpa with grandma with grandchildren playing in the yard. But another last question is, how is City of McCall determining short-term rentals versus second homeowners, and second homeowners having 15 people on their property having fun during the 4th of July, or I live in McCall, or in Donnelly, I'm sorry. And I have neighbors who bring their family, friends, and everybody else, and they have 30 people on their property in a 3-bedroom house. And how is that any different from a vacation rental? How is my neighbor hosting 30 people not a safety hazard, but a short-term rental hosting 30 people? And I'm not saying 30 people, I would never want 30 people in any of my short-term rentals. Absolutely not. They will damage the house. No way. Just hypothetically, how is that my neighbor having 30 people, not a safety hazard, but a short-term rental next door having the same amount of people in the larger home, let's say, a safety hazard? Can the city explain that?
Sure. So we've had conversations with the fire district about just increasing kind of health safety issues in general across all of our homes, regardless if they're second homes, year-round, short terms. So we've been talking about that a little bit, especially when you get into these larger homes that you can really start increasing the occupancy. I think that's where some of the concerns do come in. Ultimately, this ordinance is just looking at short-term rentals. So that's, as I've mentioned before, that's those properties where you're receiving compensation for anywhere from 1 to less than 30 days. We're not necessarily talking about general occupancy in all homes across the city, because generally speaking, that hasn't been an issue. We do not allow people can have family gatherings, but we don't allow like formal events and things. So if that's happening at a second home, it's not allowed, just like it's not or it's not allowed to happen, you know, in a short-term rental. So you can't be a wedding venue, right? Like, or something like that. And so anyways, hopefully that answers a few of your questions, but really this ordinance is focused on short-term rentals itself.
I understand, but is the city aware of Idaho law 67-6539 that talks about reasonable regulation? And again, the city proved that second homeowner who has 30 people is less of a safety hazard than a vacation rental that has 30 people. Again, I'm exaggerating. You know, I'm not saying 30. Let's say
no, I get
15.
your point.
Okay.
No, we're very well aware of that state code. And so basically what we're proposing, anything that we propose within an ordinance will be very well vetted with our attorneys. And so that's an ongoing conversation that we're having with them. And again, we're not trying to over-regulate. We're just trying to create reasonable regulations and permitting to sort of better improve our situation for everybody.
Well, I believe,
Marta, I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna move on a little bit because we're already at 6:30, if that's all right, unless you have one more question. If it's just a comment, I'd love to move on.
no, just no questions. The comments that I made,
Yeah, please feel free to use that chat window, and all of that will be you know, taken into account as well. So you're not being cut off. You can keep going, just type it out for me or reach out to us via email as well. I just want to give Mr. Jones an opportunity as well, and Mr. Spiegelman, who've been waiting. Mr. Jones, do you want to go ahead?
Oh, thanks, Erin.
Yeah.
I was just curious again about the occupancy. I know earlier we spoke, and then I saw in your slideshow just those towns that you guys had pulled stuff from. So like this afternoon, I went through and just because I use Airbnb as my main platform, so I just went through Ketchum, Jackson, Park City, Driggs, South Lake, and it seemed like the most general there was like 8 to 10 occupants for 3-bed, 2-baths, or even 2-bed, 2-bath homes or condos in those areas. So I was that's just me going on Airbnb and seeing what's offered through the platform that I use. So I'm curious. I know everybody's beating up about the occupancy, so I apologize, but it's like I'm just trying to figure out.
That's why we're here.
I'm still trying to figure out, like, where does this 2 people per whatever come to, and how are they getting their data? Because on the platform I use, this is just a quick search in these and pulling, you know, the first 10 or so that I come across are, you know, and it's not saying youth or adult, it's just saying by people. They just have it kind of 8 to 10 people for a 3-bed, 2-bath or a 2-bed, 2-bath. So I guess my question is, where are we gathering that information? Or where are those? I know you said those cities are where you're gathering the data, but that data doesn't match what's being listed in those towns.
Yeah, so
I think, go ahead, Michelle.
I was going to just say our research comes from either the town or the city or the county. So it's what is their actual like code regulation or their actual ordinance say. What you're seeing is the commercial platform, how that actually gets translated and how people actually advertise their properties might be different. They might be in compliance, they might not be in compliance based on the specifics of those regulations. But like I said, you know, sometimes people don't necessarily follow the rules.
Right. My 2 cents would be that if there is going to be some sort of occupancy thing laid out, let's actually make it realistic and worth something instead of putting some like, okay, that's what these cities say their regulations are, but I'd say if we're going to make it something and add it to the ordinance or even propose it, that it should be realistic and not just in word only and not in deed. That'd be my little 2-cent plug.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just add to that, at the beginning of all this, it was really interesting because we had a lot of people that had their applications in or their short-term rental licenses, and then we'd go on and actually see at the beginning that their listings on Airbnb or VRBO didn't exactly match what they've actually applied for with our city. So there can be some discrepancies there. And we're not saying that, everybody's doing that, but it's definitely out there. So sometimes you have to find some middle ground, right, to make sure we're keeping people honest to some degree. Mr. Spiegelman, you've been so patient. Think you should get some sort of gold star award tonight. Oh, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
We got you now.
would you tell that to my wife, please, about how patient I am?
Yes, I'll send a note.
Yeah. I've got a couple comments and a couple questions for you. First, we've had a house in McCall, and we have 2 of them on the lake that we've had since, I think, 1973. And we occupy them some of the year. We have some long-term rentals for each of those for 9 months of the year. And then in the summertime, when I come, but we also have some short-term rental. But what is your definition of a short-term rental?
Less than 30 days.
Less than 30 days of short-term rental. Okay. So, I heard some things. I listened to the February meeting today that I found. I also have not received any notice. We've had problems over the past on other issues in our neighborhood, and we have not received, again, I didn't receive any information on this. Maybe it went directly to our manager, but we do have a mailing address on file that I would love to be able to get all of anything coming from the city to go through my mailing address. Any kind of notification of any kind of a hearing, because I do feel a little blindsided, and I do want to be involved, and I don't live up there all the time, but McCall is my home, and I want to be notified. We're 325 Westlake. So I know that the occupancy, everybody's talking about the occupancy. We had 8 kids in our family, and we had 5 beds for the boys in one room, and we had 3 beds for the girls in another room, and my parents were in another room upstairs. And then we had a hide-a-bed in the living room, which is not a bedroom, but it's a large living room. And so we had 4 people at times upstairs, and we had 8 people downstairs. We had 12 in the family occupying our house. And while maybe 4 per room is not a fair number, I think 2 per room, to be able to create some type of an ordinance with 2 per room is may not be fair. And I would hope that there would be case by case. And I don't know if you do any grandfathering, but there should be some kind of a case by case on that. And I think there could be a happy medium for a lot of the people here. I don't think they want to be pigeonholed into 2 per room when they do have a larger place that could fit them. Because again, we're the property taxes in McCall change, and as prices are going up, and if you're on more of a fixed income, it's expensive, and it's going to price all of us out of the market. And if you stop having houses to rent on short-term rentals, then you're probably not going to have the need for as many businesses there either. And I know all the problems with businesses, but we're helping with the economy there as well by bringing people in, and they're consuming, and they're buying goods and services, and they're helping the tax base in McCall. So I hope you guys would consider that. Now, I noticed that you said in the meeting that I looked at in February, they're talking about a $750 cost for an inspection. Is that kind of the number that's being thrown out there?
We don't have any specific numbers yet. We haven't really looked at that. We kind of, when we talked to the council the last time, the question is, would you like to see an inspection process? And then we would work with the fire district on what that would take to actually complete an inspection process. So again, our fees are intended to cover basically staff time. We don't generate any income on them. But it's not necessarily the idea of fees is that it's not being subsidized by just the taxpayer in general, that fees are covering cost. So that's how those fees would be set up.
Okay, because we are paying taxes. I mean, I know, you know, there's a fee. It makes sense to have a fee. And I don't know what people are paid per hour, but certainly not $750 to do an inspection on a house. I mean, I think that's I'm not going to call it gouging, but it's not reasonable. So hopefully they'll come up with a reasonable number when they're doing that. And there's some people that have more than one vacation rental, maybe side by side. And so to be able to even say they're both the fixed fee, really the time involved should be part of the consideration. So hopefully you're going to look at that. What about percentage of time staying in a house? So let's say that I'm 6 weeks out of the year that I'm doing short-term rentals, that I do, you know, I only do 6 weeks. Am I going to have to get a permit for that? Is that for the whole year? Am I going to pay a prorated portion? Because we are doing long-term rental and we also rent our house, and we may not be able to do short-term rental. We may just we may end up staying there more to be able to not become a short-term rental anymore.
Yeah, that question came up at the previous session, I believe. People were asking about, like, what if I just rent out my house, you know, once? I mean, anytime you're renting out your house for compensation, it technically requires a permit. Will there be kind of a graduated fee schedule? I don't know that yet. We haven't gotten that far into this thing, but we kind of heard that from at least one other person so far.
Okay, because I'm sure that everybody on this call does, you know, that stay at their house, it's a percentage. So to pay an annual fee, you know, and you don't do it very often, I think there should be some type of a graduated schedule on it. And I also heard on the call something about trailers. So that on that February, in the February city council meeting. So are you looking where people can't have trailers on their property if it's a vacation rental, whether it's a boat trailer or you know, U-Haul or whatever? I mean, whatever, just you know, if you're driving up there and you're filling it up with all your bikes and stuff, what is that ordinance, part of the ordinance, going to be about?
Yeah, that conversation was related to the parking provision that already exists. And it's the idea that all of the parking for the short-term rental has to be on site and on a surfaced area. So you can't park vehicles and trailers up and down the residential streets. They have to be contained on the parcel itself. And so that's basically an existing regulation already.
Okay. So now, and just out of curiosity, is there an ordinance for trailers to park in residential neighborhoods on the sides of the houses when it's not paved, or in backyards, and, you know, cars on blocks? And is there any kind of ordinances for that?
No, I mean, the current ordinance is that all like parking's on surfaced area, so that can be gravel, it just can't be yard, right?
Okay. Just, you know, just as long as it's consistent in the regulation. I'm anti-regulation, and you know, or I'm for safe regulation, something that commonsensical, but just extra government regulation, I'm not really keen on. Densities. Are you looking at any of the money that's going in to kind of help pay for some density studies? I know when you've had some of the residential developments developed, you're not charging the developers for density studies or impact studies. So are you guys doing impact studies in McCall? What's happening with that?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Are you asking about impact fees?
Well, no, we had a subdivision and there was some health and there's some safety issues. And we had asked for the city to ask the developer to pay for some impact studies before the approval. So you're trying to put in some new regulations here and some new ordinances. Are you doing some impact studies on this? Or are you just coming up with some of these numbers based on research? Are you actually looking at McCall to see that 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 per room, that the city can even handle it? I mean,
so basically, at this point, we haven't proposed anything specific. But what we were looking at was sort of what felt like a reasonable number based on total occupancy. So if it's per bedroom or per house or something like that, there's a number, like as I mentioned, there's a number of different ways to do that. It could be per bedroom, it could be per household, it could be per square foot, like square footage. I mean, there's a number of different ways to do it. The idea ultimately is to keep the occupancy in line with what sort of is more residential in character, right? So, is it normal to have households of 19 people? I mean, we see a lot of short-term rentals for 19 people. And personally, I don't really know very many families that have 19 people, right? So the idea is, again, to try to sort of, keep the occupancy in line, because the more people you have, the more secondary impacts it often causes. And there's ways to mitigate that. And I think our code allows for ways to mitigate, those larger ones, but we want to make sure that right tools are in place so that we're basically not creating these mini hotels throughout all of our neighborhoods, right? And so again, we're kind of talking about impacts of the much larger ones on neighborhoods and surrounding.
Okay, and I just have one final question. It's about you on that February call or the February meeting, they talked about camping or tents. So we live on a lake. On the lake, and we have 2 houses, and we've got a big private beach. And sometimes, I'll sleep in a tent out back. I've had friends say, "Hey, I want to come up for a few days." And I know this is not during a short-term rental, but if I'm considered a short-term rental and they want to come and camp out in the back and enjoy the lake out back, are they able to? Can we pitch a tent, or is that going to be subject to a regulation?
So if you're using your home, if you're utilizing your home, then those short-term regulations aren't in play. It's only when you're renting it out to another party and they're paying you money, right? Okay. So if you want to pitch a tent, you can camp 10 out of 30 days, right, in your own yard. But that's what the current regulations are across the city. So just to clarify, if you're using your property for your own usage, that's different than if you're renting it out to other persons for compensation. Okay,
so if we have to get a permit, it's not going to hinder me.
It's not going to affect how you personally utilize it. Same as your comment about number of people staying in the home. So it has to do with, if it's your own personal use based on the Fair Housing Act, if you're related people within your home, that's not what we're talking. We're talking about unrelated people that are utilizing the home for a short-term rental. They're paying for it, right? So there's some nuances there, but so just know that, like, when you're utilizing your personal home, there's some provisions in place that allow you to utilize that home.
Okay, guys.
I think we're getting a little too nuanced.
I'm gonna reel her in. Okay, so a couple things that before we close, there are a couple of comments I've been reading in the chat. Like I said before, all of those are going to go as part of the record for this conversation that we're having. A couple things I wanted to touch on. first thing, I did put it in the chat window, but you can go to our website and click on the communications tab. That's where my page is. And there's a ton of different ways for you to get involved across the board at the city. So the most important ones to you are the newsletter sign up. And we utilize that to contact you for a bunch of different titles. And you'll see them there. There's one that's for short-term rentals. I recommend that you sign up for that if you, for some reason, didn't get this message. We also sent the messages out to anybody who actually registered with a business license. So if your email, I had somebody today that had to go into their office to get their bills paid, but that's not necessarily where they want to get their information. So just making sure that you've got that the right way with the city in the way that you want to be contacted. I can't necessarily customize a mailed, option for individual people, but I definitely do my best to try to reach as many people as possible. There was a comment that we've we're saying that we're not very far along, but it seems that we are very far along, and it seems like this is just a checkbox. So this has been a conversation that's been going on with our city council, and so it's another great way to get involved is to go back and look at all of our city council meetings or our agendas, or just honestly email me or anybody at the city, and we're happy to walk you through them. But we are definitely not far along. There's no ordinance that's been written at this point, and there's nothing that's in play. That's just why we're talking to you. So TextMyGov is a brilliant new service we introduced this year. It's fantastic for a couple different reasons. One, it enables you to ask random questions to our phone number and get answers 24 hours a day. The really cool part is if for some reason we don't have an answer to your question, I get a notification and then I have an opportunity to reach out to you directly. And then in many cases, add that question to our database. So you're actually helping us build that database. Another great way that you can use it is actually by signing up for notifications. So we do have a variety of ways for you to sign up to get text message notifications if that's an option for any of you. So Michelle explained at the beginning, kind of the way forward. So some reminders. This is not the last time you're going to get to comment on this. This is going to go in front of P&Z. This is going to go in front of your city council. And in each of those steps, you have an opportunity to give a public comment, whether in writing, in person, or virtually. So take advantage of those times and make sure that your voice is heard. I think we learned a lot today, Michelle. We have a lot of notes, and so a lot to put together for you. But please feel free to sign up for that newsletter so we can make sure we keep in contact with you as this moves on. The last thing I had on my notes was just to let you know that once we have our head wrapped around this, after taking in all your feedback, we're going to create that website. And some of you mentioned, hey, where's all this data coming from? We'll make sure to give you where that data came from. And we can also link you through to some other surveys and other interesting places that we've received feedback from our local public regarding short-term rentals, and try to answer some of these questions that we've gotten here that maybe we didn't get to tonight. So unless Michelle has anything she'd like to add, I think I'll try to wrap us up here at 1 hour and 15 minutes. Michelle, anything else?
No, I just appreciate everybody's time and comments. And I think like every time we do this, we learn something new. So it's good. Hopefully we have a better end product at the end of this. So thank you everybody for your time and input.
Yeah, I'm putting my email in the chat window in case you guys don't have it. And please feel free to reach out to me and I'll lead you to the right place if I don't have the answers, okay? All right, everybody give me a wave and know that you know it's over. All right, thanks so much for your input tonight, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evening.